Part IV, Chapter 5 of Short History of the Christian Church by John Fletcher Hurst. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 5, The Quakers. The rise of the Quakers was due to a latent spiritual desire to return to the primitive Christian faith. The long conflict between the Episcopalian and the dissenting bodies promised little for the growth of Christian life among the people. They labored in the same general direction with the Puritans and Presbyterians. All alike were nonconforming, but they had no visible connection with any religious body, and kept aloof from all political relations. They increased with great rapidity. Their heroism was of the loftiest type. The persecutions visited upon them nerved them for more daring deeds of faith and patience. George Fox, born 1624, was the founder of the Quakers, or Friends. He was profoundly convinced that the office of the Holy Spirit was largely neglected, and that, in this regard, the Church had wandered from its original faith. He began to preach his doctrines throughout England, and many flocked to his standard. He gathered his followers from every class. The beautiful and calm life of his disciples, their devotion to the fundamental Christian doctrines, and their heroic meeting of persecution gave them an additional charm. Soon there were Quaker preachers on the continent as far east as Hungary. They spent but little time in answering the slanders of enemies. Their chief concern was a spiritual reformation of all Europe. While the principal part of the theological system of the Quakers related to the offices of the Holy Spirit, they laid emphasis on other doctrines. The divine sovereignty, the need of constant prayer, the duty of meditation on divine things, the certain general judgment, the necessity of peace and goodwill, the refusal to take up carnal weapons, the impropriety of oaths, and the choice of the ministry without regard to sex, were matters of fundamental importance. The persecution of the Quakers in England was violent. No class of dissenters was visited with such gross treatment. Even the women were not spared. Many Quakers were driven out of the country. Many who remained were imprisoned and persecuted. A strong reinforcement came to the body by the accession of William Penn. He was the son of an English admiral. He secured the right to a large tract of land in America, which still bears his name, Pennsylvania. The settlement in Pennsylvania under Penn occurred in 1682. Many of his co-religionists in England, with others from Germany, came to America. But even here they met with cruel oppression everywhere except in Penn's colony. Their experience in 2 towns in New England was of a piece with their tribulations elsewhere. Old Newbury had her fields a tongue, and Salem's streets could tell their story of fainting women dragged along, gashed by the whip accursed and gory. Though small in numbers, the Quakers have exerted a strong influence on the development of Christian civilization. Never were the rights of conscience more bravely asserted than by the original Friends, and they have constantly labored for the amelioration of suffering and the abolition of injustice. They have been the bitter enemies of the slave trade, and the great trials of Penn and Meade in 1670 at the Old Bailey courts "will forever remain as noble monuments of their resistance to the arbitrary proceedings of the courts of judicature and the violent infringement of the privilege of jury." Many reforms in the treatment of the prisoner and the insane may be traced to their enlightened and uncompromising advocacy. They were the first to set on foot many movements, the beneficent results of which have spread far beyond themselves. End of chapter 5.